No, that's not going to work. If we're going to solve the collective challenge of disinformation, we're going to have to wake up at least a little bit. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right. Welcome back to day 2 of StratCom. I hope that yesterday was productive and we moved the ball forward yesterday. First and foremost, we'd like to thank our partners once more. Well, first and foremost, my name's Graham Brookie. I'm the director of the DFR Lab at the Atlantic Council. We're so happy that you could join. Second, we'd like to thank our partners who could make this all happen. Most notably, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, LENAR, Google, the Embassy of Lithuania, the EU mission to the US, and exactly where we're at, the Embassy of Sweden. A few things about yesterday. First, tweet along. We're still using hashtag StratComDC. Second, it was kind of interesting during the opening. We all basically know each other at this point. And I don't see her here this morning yet, but our friend Olga tweeted that this is basically like getting the band back together, the counter-disinfo band back together on your reunion tour that kind of spans the world. And this group gets together in a bunch of weird places around the world, whether it's the next conference in the Baltics, or the next conference in Southeast Asia, or the next conference in Brazil, or wherever. This community is global, it's growing. That's generally a good thing. And I pithily tweeted back to Olga, thank you all for liking it, or those of you who did like it, that basically maybe the whole point of countering disinfo was the friends that we made along the way. And it was a joke, but it also wasn't really a joke. I mean, part of the response, the way that we think about this at the Atlantic Council is this is a challenge of disinformation that is truly collective. And if we're going to do anything about it, then we're going to need to all act at least with an understanding of each other. And for us, the main actors with that are all actors within the audience today. You're all here. Whether it's folks from government or folks from media, folks from the private sector, specifically the social media companies, obviously. And if we all act in silos, then we're not actually going to solve the issue. So when we say, well, maybe this was all about the friends that we made along the way, what we're talking about is maybe it's all of the friends that we ended up making within all of those groups that at least had an understanding of each other in order to do something about it. And so the definition of success for this conference, and this group just generally, is to not have the same conversation again and again and again. Next year, we're going to be talking about different stuff, because the stuff that we talked about this year, we already fixed, or we solved. That's the goal. So this morning, we're really excited for this conversation that will happen directly after me. It's focused on working with friends, allies, and partners with a specific focus on one of those groups that I just mentioned. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris Krebs, who is the first director of the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which I hope that he'll explain a little bit, because it's a major step that the U.S. government has taken to help solve this challenge, as well as the ambassador, our host, Karen Olofsdatter. So please welcome to the stage.
Well, warmly welcome to all of you to House of Sweden. I'm sure most of you were, or many of you were here yesterday. But we are very proud of this building, I just want to say. Trying to, through our architecture, portray transparency, openness, wanting to have dialogue with all our American friends all the time, basically. So this house is used for very many different purposes. I guess foreign influencing is maybe the second oldest job in the world. Countries trying to influence each other, and that's what we do all the time as diplomats. Downstairs we actually have a great exhibit about Swedish dads trying to promote gender equality and our way of doing it. But it's of course when we come to disinformation that it's a totally different thing, and which is something that we've seen increasing over, I'm sure there's always been disinformation throughout history. when it comes to relationships between countries. But of course, given our media situation and social media and new inventions, it's of course a totally different ball game this day that we have to work with. So I'm very happy to welcome you, Chris, here. You have a very great background. I won't do the American thing, reading your but you have worked on infrastructure safety and agencies, and you have worked at Google and so on. So I think you're a perfect fit to handle all the issues we have at hand, because it really requires both public and private partnerships and cooperation in dealing with all the threats that we have in the future. And of course, we can't do it alone. The issues we are talking about are global. Transatlantic cooperation is at the heart of trying to tackle what we want to tackle. And so I'm very happy that we can host. And I understood that this is the third year of this conference. And Dan Fried, my good old friend, said it's just become better and better. So that's great. So who knows how it will be next year. But that's fantastic, of course. So what we have to discuss, of course, is both how non-state actors and state actors challenge our fundamental values, how they interfere with our elections, and of course, in the end, democracy. And more this is discussed both between politicians, but also, of course, in the media, in the general domain as well. So we really have to find a common ground in this area, because this, as I said, is a global phenomena where we cannot put up any walls or borders between ourselves because it doesn't work like that anymore. And we can't just work on it when it's election time. We have to work around every day, 365 days a year, to tackle this, because it doesn't stop. And it's hard to detect also what is influence, when do we see it, how do we teach our kids to be aware of it, and so on. So that's extremely important. So to protect our democracy, we really need to understand how these threats operate and work, and I'm sure that you are all much more familiar with that than I am. So I have the great honor to be able to pick Director Krebs' brain together with you for a little while on all the issues that are important and how we can cooperate on them together. So as we are, most of us, political junkies in this town who love politics, I can't wait for your election next year. It's the most, I love American elections. I've always loved them. I served here in 2008, you know, when it was Obama versus McCain. Extremely exciting election, just as exciting the one coming up. We are looking at the primaries and so on. So what do you see as the biggest challenges in this election cycle? It's about a year to go. Right. What are the gaps you see? What are the challenges for it, and how do you deal with it?
So to start, first, thanks for having me. Thanks to Atlantic Council, Graham, Ambassador Fried, Geisha. Thank you. Congrats, by the way, again on the deputy gig. And also, I am on Swedish territory right now.
Oh,
right?
You are.
God, thank you. So I love leaving DC because you get to escape the gravity well. You get outside the news cycles. That's not quite the case here, but still, it's like whew, a little bit of fresh air. And also, this venue is amazing. My second year here. Last year we were downstairs, which again is great. But this view is fantastic. So thank you. It's a good way to start the day. So as we think forward to 2020, kind of where my head is, I tend to look back at 16 and how we were all kind of caught unawares or by surprise of this pernicious effort to destabilize our government, to influence the way voters voted. So we have an advantage, I think, in 2020 that we demonstrated in 2018. We know what they're trying to do, the Russians particularly. Yeah. We know, generally speaking, what some of their mechanisms are between the Internet Research Agency, Project Lakta, and in the intelligence services. So we have an advantage that we have a set of defenses, we have a set of capabilities that we can pull up, that we can deploy, that we can engage now. We don't have to be sitting there waiting for the intelligence to come in before pivoting and having these hard conversations on whether we disclose it, whether, what we do. Now, we have that, and then there's a full coordinated whole of government approach. But that's only part of it. There is, to be successful here, it's going to require a whole of society approach, right? So the government can do some things. DoD can do their thing, the intelligence services can do their thing, and the tech companies have to do their piece, but the average American, the voter, has to do their part too. And so the big gap, as I see it, is how do we all work together to connect the dots to provide the right sort of education and awareness to the voters? How do we get critical thinking tools or capacity building out into the platforms? And so this right here is a great way to figure out the tools that are needed. But the average American is not, tapped into Twitter right now tracking hashtag StratCom. Unfortunately, they should be. Everyone should be, of course. But we have to get, deeper down into the stack to raise awareness on how you evaluate information on platforms that's being presented to you. I got to give a lot of credit to the tech companies of how they've improved their game since 2016. I think Facebook's done a great job, Google, Microsoft, Twitter. They're all stepping up. They're all moving forward. Is there more to do? Absolutely. Because there are incredible technical challenges that we're faced with that there's just not a lot of instrumentation or algorithms developed. Deepfakes is the thing that seems to be exhausting a lot of the oxygen in the halls of Capitol Hill right now. I mean, honestly, when you look at what's happened over the last 6 months, this is cheesy, but I'm more concerned about cheap fakes, right? How do you just slow down a video? How do you speed up a video? How do you slightly alter it? I think those are probably, if you have base source material that you can compare and contrast against, then you can probably detect quicker. But if it's a novel, never seen before video, that's going to be harder to find. And so we still have a lot of challenges. I think the capabilities that the adversary is going to develop over the next 6 months will rival those that they've developed in the last 2+ years. So again.
So when I listen to you, it sounds like you don't really differ between the physical election security and the information campaigns during these years. Because in my country, we mostly focus on the information campaigns because we're not worried so much about our actual election system.
So I break
or technology.
I do break it down into two completely different approaches. The technical piece of election systems. We've over-rotated a little bit on the voting machines itself because that's what the average voter experiences, engages with. It's what is the machine you engage with? Do you press a button? Do you turn a dial? Do you fill in a bubble? And then do you feed it in a machine? And then what happens there? This is the hacking part of elections, and the technical hacking, not the brain hacking. So when you think back to 2016, there were 3 parts as we put out in the intelligence community assessment: the targeting of election infrastructure, the hack and leak campaigns against the DNC, and then the social media targeting or influence ops. On the first one, the technical, the infrastructure, I see this as an engineering problem. It's a technical problem. You can solve for it fairly, not easily, because it's a massive technology deficit that's out there in our 50 states, but it's fairly straightforward. Obviously, the disinformation side, much more complex because you're dealing with different kinds of computers in people's brains. I try to develop frameworks as much as possible to understand what the target set is as well as what the adversary's decision calculus is. On the election infrastructure side, 3 prongs. First, what is the cost to successfully launch an operation? What is the risk associated with successfully executing that operation? And then what does the overall success look like? So for technical hacking of election systems, in the US, 50 states, distributed decentralized systems, it's really, really expensive. It's really costly for an operator, whether it's FSB, GRU, Chinese MSS, whatever it is, to infiltrate these systems and actually change votes at scale. It's really hard to do it in an undetected way. And I want to put a pin in the undetected and come back to that. The risk of successfully executing that operation is also really high. That is something that I think could be just short of war, basically, that sort of conflict. And then the third is What's the effectiveness? Again, it's really hard to do this. So you can invest all this, you can put your operation and your infrastructure at risk, and you might not make much of a dent in the overall impact or outcome of a vote, assuming that's what your strategic goal is. But what if your strategic goal is just undermining confidence in the process and just popping up in, I don't know, Illinois voter registration database saying, hi, I'm here. You have no idea what I'm doing. That's the thing where the technical piece and the influence operation converge.
Yeah.
Because if ultimately their outcome is to undermine confidence in the process, then the overall purpose of an election also converges with the goal of the adversary. The overall purpose of an election is to convince the loser they lost.
Yeah.
Right? Not convince the winner they won, but the loser that they lost. So this peaceful transition of power. The outcome of the adversary is to undermine our confidence in the process.
Actually, you don't need much, as you say. It's enough to
And
pop up in one state.
And disproving a negative is really, really, really hard. So what we
Because I've been thinking that it's to your disadvantage that you have so many ways. I mean, that the electoral, that it works differently in each state, but actually it could work to your benefit.
So what if they pop up in a hard red or a hard blue state, and okay, big deal. It is to a certain extent the swing states, the traditional battleground states that matter.
Yeah.
One county could make a difference. So what we have to do is focus on the technical piece as much as possible, even on the election hacking side, but also focus on the voter resilience side. What I mean is, so let's say a voter registration database gets popped with ransomware 3 or 4 weeks before an election, and then now we run the risk of voter suppression. The average voter then gets stressed out, they don't know what to do. No, look, the information's all there. Still go vote. If you get to a voting precinct and the system's locked up, that's okay. There's going to be a backup system there, either online or paper. If you show up and you know you're registered to vote and they don't have you in the system, you can ask for a provisional ballot. It may take a little bit more time to get the ballot certified, or validated and then certified, but still, there's a process in place. We've got to be much more resilient, much more patient with the process, because this is conflict now, and we're all on the front lines. It's not happening on the high seas or in the air. It is happening here. It's happening in our institutions of power and democracy.
And when you think about leadership of handling this, because I think this is something that we're all grappling with. How should we organize ourselves? How do you see it? Should it be like one, when it comes to both preparing, mitigation, and then countering disinformation and these interference campaigns, should it be one solid point that organizes it all, or should it be that various actors through one joint kind of order does it? How do you set it up?
Yeah.
Because Sweden is a country full of agencies,
Right.
which is, we go back 400 years with that, which we have always seen as very effective. But when we come to something complex as this, is it?
I think, well, so to go back to Graham's introduction of my agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, this time last year when I spoke last year, we were the National Protection Programs Directorate, a part of the Department of Homeland Security. That simple name change, there was a law that was passed last November that just simply changed my name from the old thing to the new thing. That process took 8 years just to get Congress to pass the bill and then sign it into law. So to assume that we're going to be able to stand up agencies focused on hybrid threats, things that are so nimble and change on a dime, it's not practical. The other piece is that I think we all have different equities, and we all have, better way to put it, we all have better weapons or tools that we bring to the fight. Mine is resilience building and public awareness. The law enforcement community is investigation and locking people up. DOD has their unique skill set. The intelligence services can go figure out. State has their diplomacy piece and working. Everybody has a different piece. Now what that mandates then is effective coordination.
Yeah.
So everybody working together. And when I say coordination, I don't mean every couple weeks we get together over at the executive office building and have a meeting and update each other on what we're doing. This requires real coordination, sitting together on a regular basis, comparing notes, coordinating operations. Because the biggest thing here, and this is, I'm going to another event later later today to talk about threat intelligence, cybersecurity threat intelligence. Everybody has a piece of the picture. Everybody's got, you know, the three blind mice. Everybody's got one hand on the elephant. We've got to have all of our information coming together to figure out what the total picture of the adversary's actions are, and then coordinate effectively what our response is.
Well, talking about the elephant then, it's big, of course, but there are also emerging threats, and influence activities proliferate, malign actors learn from each other, and there are entities, of course, that are besides state actors. We have actors within our countries, and then we target, you know, then we border on freedom of speech and so on. So how should we look at all this? What do you see? Is it how do we handle all these emerging threats? Because it's, as you said initially, it changes all the time.
Yeah. So it is, to your point, you know, this is not just the Russians, right? The playbook's out there. The Iranians are active. The Chinese are active. The North Koreans are going to be active. Everybody, though, has a different outcome. And this is just the foreign state actors. Everybody has a different outcome. The Chinese are going to have a different outcome in mind than the Russians. The Russians, this goes back to the Gerasimov doctrine. They can't win for fighting. They win by everybody else losing. If that's their mentality, then all they want to do is make the whole, you know, they're kind of like the Joker and Batman. They just want to see the world burn. And so that's their goal. The Chinese, though, need us to be stable, entangled within their supply chain. They want us buying their stuff. So they're going to seek an outcome that actually better aligns with their policy objectives. So what I'm more worried about with Chinese actors is something along the lines of, you know, a couple weeks before the election, if it's not going the way, polling or whatever, the way they like, then perhaps they would cancel an order of X product or Y product if they wanted to flip a state. That's completely theoretical. I'm just saying that is kind of what that would look like, as opposed to hack and leak of a candidate's emails. But the bigger challenge is that, there are absolutely, the playbook's out there. Disinformation as a service is a thing. And you're going to see domestic actors getting into the space, whether to spread conspiracy as a proxy for a candidate, or actually more directly. So what we've got to do, again, is help advance the consumers of information to be more discerning consumers of information, to understand that periodical or that newspaper doesn't actually exist in Lansing, Michigan, or whatever it is. You know, we've got to have ways to validate. And I got to give credit. Facebook made some announcements earlier this week that is get much more transparent, and that is going to be hugely important going forward. Is much more transparency on the platform, so that us as users can say, that's interesting. Why did this user just flip to speaking English after 7 years of only tweeting in Russian? What's going on here? And I will say, last year, one of the things I remember saying downstairs is, wouldn't it be great if on Twitter or whatever, that there was some sort of state attribution to a news, state-sponsored news, like a hammer and sickle or whatever. And that's part of what Twitter or Facebook announced that they would be doing. They would, for state-sponsored media, they'd be much clearer on what the source is. And that is critical information, so that whether it's my mom and dad or my aunt and uncle or whatever can look at it and say, what the heck's going on here? Why am I being served up this ad? And, you know, why is crazy Uncle Bob, you know, sending these links? Because everybody's got a crazy Uncle Bob or whatever, and you know, we need to be able to cut through the chat. A little bit
personally, better. I'm checking now all the ads I get for dog beds, because I just bought one and I'm kind of overwhelmed by that. So who's hiding in that sector? Anyway, so how I just touched upon that initially. We all, and you have talked about it as well. How do we all work together? How do state actors and private companies, private actors, how do we establish best practices? And how do we use the best knowledge we have? Because this is extremely complicated, and of course we can't force private companies unless we use legislation to act in the way we want them to, because most of this is actually carried out in private sector.
And this is entirely consistent with kind of my agency's mission of public-private partnership building, but doing this security enhancement, this resilience building in a way that not just is respectful of the Constitution, First Amendment rights, but actually reinforces and builds up those rights and then protections within the Fourth Amendment and so on and so forth. We can't take a content approach. We've got to be zeroing in on the actors and understanding what the actors are doing in their mechanisms, regardless of what the content is, and almost to a certain extent, start exposing the actors and their mechanisms and their mouthpieces and the content associated with it, so we can just, to a certain extent, ridicule them.
Yeah.
Again, I think sunshine's the best disinfectant for a lot of this stuff. So what we've been doing is working closely with the social media platforms. We had a war room set up in my facility during the 2018 election, where we had some representatives from social media. We had representatives from the election community, secretaries of state. We also had some other interagency partners there. And what we wanted to do is almost serve like a switchboard. And so if a state election official noticed something that looked kind of suspicious on a platform, they were able to directly engage with them. So we had those kind of APIs between the different players. In one case in Ohio, I always get this wrong. Ohio, right, Sarah? Ohio, got it. Ohio, the Secretary of State saw a video that was being passed around on Facebook, I think, that showed a video or a voting machine changing a vote. And they're like, this is not happening. They were able to validate on site that the machine was not malfunctioning. And so they went directly to Facebook and they said, hey, this is what's going on. Can you do something here? Facebook was able to validate, and they were able to remove the content because it was disinformation on voting. I mean, this is one of the policies similar to what they've implemented recently. And so that connection, that happened in a matter of maybe an hour or more. Can we get faster? Yes, but that sort of connection between the interface between the public and the voting process, and then the platforms that are serving up the information, that's going to be hugely critical in terms of disabling or disenfranchising instead of disenfranchising the voter, disenfranchising the actor.
Do you think, given that it took 8 years to change the name of your agency, are you worried that us as state actors, which we are not as nimble and fast as the private actors? Can we keep up the speed with them? And is that a challenge? Because we need to be flexible and have the knowledgeable resources to do all this.
This is kind of one of those questions of, do we have the authorities we need to be effective, and can we operate within those authorities? But again, the majority of the work in terms of the kind of hand-to-hand combat with the adversary is going to be happening in private sector spaces and private sector actors owning the platforms and the terms of service and the rules of engagement. I think that ultimately yes, there needs to be more sort of transparency in the process, and we're figuring out what that transparency looks like. We never get that wrong, or right rather. Technology advances too fast for legislation to keep up, so we need more kind of open-ended sorts of mechanisms rather than that are appropriately tailored. But this is really hard. It's really hard right now to get almost anything through Congress. They've got a lot going on. So how do we? How do we take advantage?
But I think there are many of them there.
Yes.
They can.
But it is an issue. Look, it is an issue that's top of mind. And so, but again, I think the platforms are stepping up. New traditional media is stepping up, and this is, we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. And then when it comes to civil-military cooperation on this, because of course our defense forces and the defense of our countries and so on are all interested in new technology. I've actually been talking more about trade with Pentagon than I have with commerce, because they see this in a security light, and also when it comes to new technology, 5G, Ericsson, etc., etc. It's the Pentagon. How do you see this? How do you work more with the military phase, and how do we increase civil-military cooperation in this area?
So prior to 2018, I think it was the summer of, it was doesn't matter, 17, 18. There was a memorandum of understanding signed between Secretary Mattis at DOD and Secretary Nielsen at DHS that pledged cooperation between the two departments in securing domestic critical infrastructure, with elections being one of them. At the same time, as General Nakasone has talked about, at Cyber Command and NSA has talked about standing up the Russia Small Group, and Neuberger, who's now the director of the NSA Cybersecurity Division, was leading that effort. I had regular coordination calls and engagement with her, maintain that coordination today. Those are really useful sorts of engagements, but you've got to put a little bit of context around it. So when I think about what I need out of DoD to help protect, going back to the election system piece, I don't necessarily need them telling me what IP addresses are associated with Russian command and control infrastructure for whatever attack they're launching. Because they're good, they're nimble, they pivot off that infrastructure in a matter of days, weeks, very quickly. What I need more, and Cyber Command has been out there, they've worked with the Ukrainians, they've worked with the North Macedonians and the Montenegrins. What I need is, okay, the Russians are still using spear phishing to infiltrate systems. They're still attacking election night reporting websites. I need the same out of how the Russians or the Chinese are targeting the Taiwanese election. Those sorts of techniques at a higher level that I can then bring back and go to a Secretary of State in whatever state and say, hey, the top trick of in the toolkit for these guys is spear phishing. So we've got to raise the level of training. We've got to implement multi-factor authentication. We have to get to a hardened email client. It's those sorts of things that help them invest in their capabilities rather than hunting for an IP address that's like chasing Kaiser Soze. I mean, it's just, it's not there.
Yeah.
I'm trying to count my pop culture references already today.
Well, we're all impressed you have some.
Well, it's very dated.
More than I do.
I'm not watching TV much these days. But it is, again, it's going to take this joint civil-military cooperation, but it's got to be done. Again, I go back to the Constitution. It's not about being consistent with. It's about reinforcing, defending the Constitution.
Yeah, no, true. But I guess technology will be much more interlinked in the future between both military and then, in Sweden we are now revamping an old concept of ours, which we had during the Cold War, which is called total defense, where we much more integrate both our civilian defense and when we say civilian defense, it's everything from the big corporations of Sweden, looking at them, which are security related. How does that interlink with the defense of the country and so on? So I think this is something we all need to address much more in the future. It's not going to be as separate as it is now anyway. As we are at the Atlantic Council, which of course is established to increase the cooperation across our joint ocean, how do you see cooperation with the European Union? I know the European Union is stepping up its efforts, so are also the member states doing individually and so on. So how do you think we can increase the cooperation, and what would be the most important pieces for you to work with us on?
So over the last year or so, there's been a significant increase in cooperation across these various multilateral fora, whether it's NATO or G7. G7 set up a rapid response force, a mechanism in Charlevoix last year. NATO, similarly. In fact, I was in Brussels in May, for the first. It was the first time a DHS representative had sat at the North Atlantic Council, had repped the U.S. at a North Atlantic Council. I mean, it was kind of cool, where the ambassador was backbenching me at this meeting, and I'm sitting next to the National Security Advisor from the UK. It was really a great advancement, trying to introduce hybrid threats as an area of work focus within NATO and the North Atlantic Council. And so things are moving forward. Are they moving forward fast enough? I think in any multilateral fora, you never get the speed you want. It's not necessarily a common, least common denominator, but you still have some drag in the system based on national priorities and sovereignty. What we've got to get to is openness and sharing of best practices. What I want to know is Sweden, for instance, what were the public education programs and platforms that you found effective to get into the elementary schools, the primary education? That is something that we are woefully inadequate here. How do I go work with the Department of Education? How do I go work with, at a state level, with the education systems to provide some basic education that's not, and we've got to be careful here because any time that you open it up as oh my God, the Russians are coming, you've got to defend against this, the brain immediately, the primal brain, the flight function kicks in, and people are automatically on edge, and you shut down some of the learning mechanisms. The amygdala shuts down. That was like a Wikipedia point, so don't quote me on that. So we've got to do things in a more engaging. Gamification is a great way to do it.
That's very true.
You can get the K through 12. So I've got my 3-year-old right now. Was at the park, a playground a couple weeks ago, fell off a piece of equipment and broke his femur. It sucks. A 3-year-old in a full body cast sucks. But he, in the meantime, has figured out how to work an iPad better than anybody else in the house. And he is going through these various games that are with age appropriate. And the learning, like his vocabulary in 4 weeks now, has tripled. So there are things we can do at these young age to educate and inform. Those are the same sort of mechanisms we can do here. We put it into the right educational platforms. Again, gamification is great. So we're working with a couple folks on getting some things out in the next few months that will, again, here's how disinformation. That's consistent with our War on Pineapple campaign that we launched this summer. It's trying to distill down what the elements of a social media influence operation look like. Do it in a way that's fun, that's engaging. And we got that thing, so the five steps being identify an issue, mobilize the accounts or the elements of the campaign, take it online, take it mainstream, and then take it real world. And so we got all the way up to take it mainstream. We got NBC actually did a piece on it. And then the thing I was waiting for was take it real world for like protest and counter protest. And I wanted to go on like the Today Show.
Yeah.
Right? And then be sitting there in Rockefeller Plaza with people protesting for pineapple on one side, pepperoni on the other ones, then serving up pizzas to everybody. Again, it's just a fun way to bring to life these things that we battle with and that we get so kind of in these dark, deep holes on, and figuring out how to counter the adversary. There's a way to do it that's fun, that's engaging, that's educational, that'll get, again, my mom and dad to understand, like, oh, that's what this is all about. Got it. Okay.
I think my son will be a perfect soldier. He's 17, spent so many years on war games. Maybe not as useful.
Right.
Well, maybe it will be very useful. Who knows? No, but I think you're very right. And also we probably need, for young people, also we need activism. So what we've seen, for instance, coming out of Sweden with Greta Thunberg on climate. If we could get young kids engaged on our democracy in the same way, I think that would also be a very important game changer. So we just have to hope that one of those people pops up with the same engagement, because we are at risk, of course.
Well, and that's, who's got more at stake here? This is why I do what I do every day. It's because I think about, before I go into work every day, I got 5 kids, and I want to make sure that there is a constitutional republic here for them when they get to the age of voting. That there's something they're worth voting for. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. And that is something that they will ultimately have to be fighting for, that they will need to be, hey, grown-ups, hey, this is my future you're dealing with here. Take responsibility for it.
No, I totally agree. This is why we are here. And I think that's a perfect way to end this discussion, because I was going to ask you about importance of legislation, but I think that would kind of kill our discussion. No, but I think you're so right. This is really to safeguard who we are, what we are, and how, it's something that has evolved over hundreds of years to take us to where we are, and we can't let it go or be ruined in a short time, because we have created a new fantastic technology that is, really there to help us, but has a backside to it as well. So really, thank you so much. I hope we are quite on time. Really, thank you for a super interesting discussion. And I know there's much more we can do across the Atlantic, so looking forward to that.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Director Krebs and Ambassador Olofsdotter. Okay, so now we have to get working on solutions. We're going to transition a little bit. This is where the workshops start. A couple of notes. This right here is where the back to election session will be. Downstairs, you will have deep fakes and shallow fakes in the Alfred Nobel room. You will have the private messaging session in FEM, which I just Googled. It's 5 in Swedish. I didn't know that. This is the second year we're doing it here, and I did not know that. These sessions are Schatten House rule, which means no hashtag StratComDC, okay, during the discussions that have attribution to anything that is being said. I hope that they're productive. I hope that they are questions, so this is more of a discussion. Yesterday, you got to listen. Today, I hope that you're bringing your ideas and listen to some of the experts that we've brought together to really take a deeper dive in some of these issues. So get coffee, get a muffin, and go to your rooms in the nicest way possible.